Hi everyone, InDesign 1, and this is week 7, webcast 3, and I'm going to be focusing on text frames in this webcast. You have all created a text frame, and we've talked about little pieces of text frames here and there, but I'm hoping to consolidate a lot of the information into one webcast. This will include a lot more detail in one place that you can go back to if you need to reference it, and I will talk about some of the directions we're going to go with text frames going forward. All right, I want to review first how we have been creating text frames, and this is creating a text frame on the fly, and you all have done this. We have gone to our type tool, selected it, and then drawn a rectangle. And when we draw that rectangle with the text tool, notice that immediately that cursor starts blinking in the new text frame. I'm going to go ahead and delete that real quickly. This is one of the few tools where it's okay to stay in that tool. Because remember, if we had drawn a rectangle frame or an ellipse frame in any of these other locations, we would want to immediately get out of that frame, because if we don't, there isn't much we can do to work in that frame in this tool. If we click again, it just keeps creating more and more of those frames. Where the type tool, on the other hand, as we draw this frame and let go of it, we are immediately in text editing mode. So I can take my hand off my mouse and I can just start typing. I can then take my type tool, which I have not had to change tools. It has created the text frame and it's now allowing me to edit that text frame. And I can select what I want to type and to format. Let me just zoom in here just a second on this. And then I can go to my different character formatting tools in order to take care of either font changes, size changes, and I can also go over to my swatches. We'll talk about that in just a moment as well. If that frame ends up filling up with too much text, as you know, I'm going to just move this down here a little bit. Here's my text frame. The outer edge is marked by the blue frame, which indicates the layer that it's on, and of course that's exactly the same color that my graphic frame on this same layer would look. I'm just going to take the type menu command called fill with placeholder text, which just puts in that kind of fake Latin. Right now, if I make this text frame smaller than a container that can actually hold this text, as we've said before, you will see an overflow mark, which is the red plus sign. If I deselect this text frame by clicking off of it, notice that it lightens slightly, and that's because this text frame is not currently active. When I click on the text frame, the blue edges become darker. I see the resize handles, and then I also see in my output area the red plus sign. This is going to become important when you start doing more text threading, and I think some of you I've seen in your homework assignments have already been doing that. We spent a little bit of time on that in a webcast, but you can't thread by clicking on this plus sign the very first time until that frame is active. So for example, if I click once, the first click activates the text frame. The second click will give me my overflow text in a loaded cursor. I'm going to get rid of that right now by just pressing the Escape key and go back again to this text frame. If I select a text frame and I'm already sizing it, let's say I make it a little bit smaller, and if that text frame is currently active, one click on that red plus sign is going to give me that overflow text. Remember too, we talked a little bit about the look and feel of a text frame. Just like a graphics frame, it has 8 resize handles. If you place your cursor over any one of these handles, it will resize the frame. So I place my cursor over the handle, and of course we have to remember you have to push down your mouse button. As my mouse button goes down and I move, it resizes in two directions if you select a corner handle, and it resizes in one direction if you use a side, top, or bottom handle. So I place my cursor over the resize handle, and I move my mouse. I'm dragging right, left. And as I said, if you have either a top, bottom, right, or left resize handle selected, you will only be able to go either left, right, or if it's one of these side handles, and you will only be able to resize up and down if it's either the top or the bottom. The top left corner has a larger box, which we've talked about. This is your import, and the bottom right side of the frame will always have another box. I'm going to stretch this out until it fits all the text. My overset symbol is gone, and in its place is just an empty out port. So here is the import right here, and here is the out port. Again, these are not that important until you try to start threading text. And then these are going to give you little pieces of information letting you know where text is coming from and where it's going to. All right, now that was a text frame that we drew. But if I take a regular frame, just say I draw a standard rectangle. Right now, this is not going to accept text. It's expecting either a fill or if I choose a graphics frame over here to the left of it, of course, its expectation is that it's going to get an image. And I can even choose an ellipse here, which I will put right underneath. If I take the type tool, and notice that when this type tool is above no existing frame, the little dotted lines on the left and the right form a rectangle. If I place my cursor over an existing frame, whether it's a text frame, a graphics frame, or even just a shape, those dotted lines become parens. So this is InDesign acknowledging that it sees an existing frame, and if I click, it has now just converted this rectangle into a text frame while keeping whatever properties were part of this frame. So it still has a black stroke around the outer edge. If I go into preview, you can see that that has an outer edge, probably a default 1-point stroke. I'm going to go back out into normal view. Now let me hover over this graphics frame, click, and this has just been converted into a text frame. We can see that that placeholder X went away, and it will accept text as well. I place my cursor over an oval, same exact thing. I'm seeing these dotted parens. I click, and now this ellipse is a text frame. Just about any frame or path that you create using the Tools panel in InDesign can be converted to a text frame, which is one of the real beauties of this program. In years past, we were so restricted by what type of container we created. If it was a text frame, it could only accept text. If it was a graphics frame, it could only accept graphics. And we can go back and forth. In fact, I can even select this text frame, and I can get rid of the text in it, and I can basically convert it back to a graphics frame. So it's extremely flexible in flowing with you and how your work is going, and if you change your mind, you are given plenty of opportunities to go back and do something different. I'm going to just select the text in here and delete it, each of these three. which I'm doing by the way, by just pressing Control or Command A, Control A on the Windows machine and Command A on the Mac. That selects everything in a story. So I click, press Control or Command A, hit my backspace key, and I've deleted the text. Now I'm going to switch to my selection tool because I don't want to be in my type tool when I do this. I'm going to highlight what is now a text frame, go to my Object menu, and choose Content. And I can see right now that this frame is assigned to text. But I can change it to either unassigned or graphic. And now, notice that there is no text cursor blinking. When it's selected, I no longer have an import and an output. So in this case, I have not had to redraw a frame in order to repurpose it. I've just changed what it is classified as. I'm going to do the same thing with these two frames. Go to Object, Content, and maybe I'll make these a graphic frame. And the only difference by making it a graphic frame is that it now has a placeholder X, which is a non-printable X, as we know from our work with graphic frames. All right. There was something else I wanted to say about that, and I just, I'm sure it'll come back to me. Okay. Let's talk about placing text a little bit differently. I'm going to come back to this page, but I have a empty file right now. It has nothing but just margins. There's nothing pre-existing on the page, just these margins that I set up ahead of time. The methods for creating text frames that we have all been using really are more conducive to people who are using very small amounts of type. It's a poster, an advertisement, maybe even a brochure. But if you have more content than a page or so, you're going to want to bring that text in a little differently. Maybe the text was written in Microsoft Word. Maybe it was just pulled out of a database and it's now in a .txt format. InDesign can place or import all types of text information, Microsoft Word files, Excel files, I think we can even bring in PowerPoint files. So we're not limited by what type of a file the text is. And of course, a .txt file, which means that it's a text file with no formatting, or an RTF-rich text format, which can be created from Microsoft Word and any number of word processors. That can be imported as well. So I want to show you what's going to control that. And this is, you're going to see a theme here. The same thing that we were talking about with importing images, really many of those rules, apply to importing text. One thing that might seem a little counterintuitive is that I'm going to import the text using my selection tool and not my type tool, and I'll show you why. With my selection tool, I'm going to go to the File menu and choose Place. Of course, we know this command. We're very familiar with it because this is the same command we use to import our images. In this case, I'm going to choose an RTF file, which I created in Microsoft Word. I believe originally it was a TXT file, and I brought it into Microsoft Word, and then I exported it as RTF. And I'm going to go ahead and click Open. And just like my images, I get a loaded cursor. If I drag and create any size frame that I want, and I let go, the text is poured into this frame. This text takes up far more than a couple pages. I think even though it's a shorter version of this long fairy tale, which is uncopyrighted, or I guess you consider it public domain, it's still too big for this text box. So if I wanted to, I could click on the red plus sign, and then I could link it to a second text frame. we will be spending a significant amount of time when we get into slightly larger documents, and we'll talk a lot more about threading text frames. And we've talked a little bit about it, but right now it has not been a major part of a lab. So when we get to a lab that's going to take advantage of that, we will spend quite a bit more time here. So I don't want you to worry if this isn't making sense about threading the text frame. All right, I'm going to go ahead and back this up a little bit here. What if, that's too small, hang on. What if I don't draw an existing text box? That didn't make any sense. What if I don't draw a text frame of any kind? I just click inside the margins. When you click on an InDesign page that has margins, the margins become the guides for determining the size of the text frame. Notice that other than the top, because I clicked a little bit lower, this text frame follows exactly the edges of these margin guides. And I know in a very early webcast I said that margins and column dividers have little superpowers because they get to control how a frame is created when you are pouring text into an InDesign file. Now I'm going to undo that again, and this time I'm going to click a little bit further down the page so you can see what happens. I click. Notice it starts from where I click on a vertical line, but then it follows this margin. All right, another thing I'm going to do is go to the Layout menu, change my margins and columns, and this time instead of leaving it at the default, which is what the master page has signified, leaving it at 1 column, I'm going to change it to 2 columns. Click OK. And now this first page in the file has 2 columns. But because I have not changed the master page, any pages that follow this will not have the same change. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and click in that left column. Notice it went all the way down to the bottom, but it stopped there, and then it gave me my overflow symbol. So I'm going to do something else. We have several keyboard equivalents when we are pouring large amounts of text into InDesign. We have automatic, semi-automatic, manual, and then we have full automatic without the creation of new pages. So I'm just going to use one of the keyboard equivalents that I happen to use quite often, which is the Shift key. And the Shift key says, I want you to not only pour this text into the existing column, but I want you to keep on going through the document and creating new pages until you have enough pages to hold the text. And I can show you right now, we only have 1 body page here. But watch what happens after I click here. All right, for the first page, it went from the first column up into the second column. Then it created 4 more pages. But because the master page only had 1 column divider, I guess, identified on that master page, remember these were not pre-existing text boxes, I can see that I have 4 more pages of type. Now I'm going to undo that again and get rid of my loaded cursor. Remember, I can do that by either pressing the Escape key or clicking on any tool in the Tools panel, and it will get rid of a loaded cursor. Right, now this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a text box that takes up the entire area inside the margins. And I know it's hard to see that because we've got the margin guides, which are a little more overpowering. But you can see when I use my selection tool, I have a blue outline showing you the outer edge. I let go, and now we can see the margin guide. So you can see that, in fact, I do have a text box that matches the margin. With this text box selected, I want to change this text box to a 2-column format. So I'm going to go to another command which we have looked at before. and I want to talk about why it's sometimes on the type menu and why sometimes it's on the object menu. But for right now, we're looking at the command text frame options. For a text frame that's active, this has many, many attributes that we can change, and we're going to revisit this several times today and going forward. But the one thing I'm concerned about right now is that I want to change the number of columns from 1 to 2, and click OK. And let me just pull this off slightly so you can see. Can you see that center blue line? This is now the guide within my text frame. It's a non-printing guide, just like my column guides are non-printing. But this one is specific to just this text frame. All right. Now, in this case, there is an existing text frame. So when I import that same RTF file, take a look at the upper left-hand corner, which I don't think is coming through, unfortunately. I think all you're seeing is a cursor. Okay, just like the graphics, we have a dotted line that's forming a little rectangle in the upper corner. But when I place it over the top of the existing text frame, that turns into parens, meaning that when I click, InDesign is not going to have to make its own text frame. It's going to go ahead and use the existing one. So I click. Now, here's something that's kind of interesting, right? The previous time, it only went to the bottom of the first column. Why is it now jumping over and filling up my second column before giving me my overflow? The reason for that is this is a single text box that we have created a 2-column layout to. The previous one, and let me just delete this text box real quickly or drag it over here for the moment. I'm going to bring this in one more time. Well, that's a nice little lesson. This text box was selected, so it just kept pouring the text into this, which is another good little lesson here. I need to deselect that in order to get this to work right. Good job there, Donna. All right. When I click, and there's no existing text box, it's only going to create the text box for that column. And because I have existing column dividers on the page, it doesn't have permission to go forward unless I hold down one of those keys that says go ahead and just keep creating text boxes. And when I do that, if there is a 2-column format on the page, it creates 2 separate text boxes, which is different from a text box, one text box, that is built with 2 columns. I would say in several versions ago, it wouldn't have made much difference. But today, it does make a difference because when we get into straddling text across multiple columns, you can't do that if you have 2 separate text boxes. It will only work if it's a multi-column in a single text box. And like I said, we will get more into this, into much more detail a little bit later on. Okay. Now here is one more thing I want to do with text boxes before we talk about some other items. All right. If I'm in my type tool and I'm in, currently I have either a text box selected, for instance, I have it looking like this with my selection tool and the text box is selected, or I have my type tool blinking inside of an existing text box. This creates even a different effect. I'm going to go ahead and import that again. I know you guys are going to get tired of seeing me go to the place menu and do this, but before I even get a chance to place this, notice that the text has already gone into this existing text box. And because I drew this as a single text box without going into the text frame options, notice that it's going right across that column divider, because this text box that I created, I drew it and I did not use these guides, and I did not use the way to pour it in and have these guides automatically create those separate boxes. Let's do this again. All right, now this time instead of having my type tool blinking, let's see what happens if I just select the text frame with my selection tool. Exact same result as if I had had my type tool blinking. InDesign sees that you have a text frame selected, and it just goes ahead and dumps it in without any permission. This is how we can get into trouble. Because if I go back to my demo file, let me import an image here. Or actually, better yet, hang on, let me do this instead. Let's say that I have a graphics frame ready as a placeholder to somebody who's, let's say, working in this particular newsletter or flyer. And my intention is to import text and then flow it where I want it to go. Let's say I want it over here and down below this frame. But I accidentally leave the graphics frame selected. When I go ahead and import that text, one more time, sorry, I'm going to get a very different effect. On the fly, it changed the content classification from a graphics frame to a text frame, and it just filled it up. Now the good news about this is that though it is very easy to make this mistake, it's just as easy to press Control or Command Z and do that last step, and you'll get a loaded cursor instead, and then I can go ahead and place this text where I want to. All right. While I'm going to go back to this place text file real quickly. While I'm in a text frame, your type tool is going to behave very much like any other type editing tool. I have a spell check. I can change my font and my size and my line spacing, just as you would expect inside of a Microsoft Word application or any other text editor. I can delete text by backspacing. I can add text by typing. It will wrap within a defined area. So let's say I place text at the end of this sentence, at the end of apple, and I say, I want to try one of those apples. You can see that it will wrap because this text frame is giving it its boundary that it has to stay within. As you know, we have two separate type formatting, basically, menus across the top. We have anything related on a character level, which is displayed when we highlight the capital A. And then we have anything that's related to paragraph commands when we click on the Pilcrow symbol, which is right below. It's like a little paragraph return. The paragraph commands will impact the entire paragraph, but the character commands, those that we see when the capital A is selected, will only impact either the insertion point or whatever is selected. So if I highlight the word certain and I change this to, let's say bold condensed subhead, notice that the word certain, actually that wasn't a good one, sorry. Let me go to something that's going to show it better at this really low resolution. And even then, that's a little hard to see. But you can see certain is bolder than the rest of this type. Where if I back out a little bit here, so that you guys can see the entire paragraph, with my cursor just blinking in this paragraph, if I go back to the Pilcrow symbol and I change both my left indent and my right indent, which are two of the icons I can see up here in my control panel, notice that it's impacting the entire paragraph, and I didn't have to have that paragraph selected. I just needed my cursor blinking in that paragraph. What determines that paragraph? As we know from our hidden characters, which is at the bottom of the type menu, to display those, I can see here's a pilcrow symbol in the paragraph symbol. I scroll down a little bit. Here's another one and another one. So these are going to be the clues as to how much text is going to be impacted by a paragraph command. There are two other panels which I don't ever dock over here, but I want to show these to you. We have, under Type and Tables, we have the paragraph command, and we also have, under Type and Tables, the character command. And these used to be automatically part of the dock. Oh, this moved over to my second monitor. Hang on, it's right here. I'm just going to go ahead and dock these two together, but I am not going to put them in my dock over here on the right. As I said years ago, these used to be automatically placed in the dock when we first got the dock, because we've not always had a dock with this program. But what happened is people stopped leaving them over there because just about every piece of information that I have in either of these panels, I have up across my control panel. And I don't have to have more panels in my dock in order to get this information. So for example, I'm looking at my character panel. Let me just pull this up close to here. And I'm going to click on my capital A. And if we just glance through here, we can see size, leading, size, leading. We have kerning, tracking, kerning, tracking. We have vertical scale, horizontal scale, vertical scale, horizontal scale. And we have baseline shift, and we have skew or slant, and those are both there as well. If I go to my paragraph commands and I click on the pilcrow running here across the top, here are all of my alignment commands, which I can see going through the top of this panel. I've got all of my indent commands, my space above, space below. I even have my drop cap commands and align with grid commands, which are over here. So you can see that I have everything that I need going across this control panel. There used to be just a couple of commands that I could access from this paragraph panel menu, but I have found since then that Adobe's been pretty good at populating the menu up here, the panel menu. So let's say I'm looking at paragraph commands. I go over here, and I can see that many of the commands that I saw in this panel menu are right here. So what started happening is users just decided they didn't want to waste their valuable space over here on the dock, and they just stopped docking these. So it's up to you if you want to have these docked because you like the information in these panels better. I just wanted everyone to know that these panels existed and that it has much of the same information. All right, in addition, I'm going to just close these by clicking on that upper right-hand corner. In addition to the panel, we also have our type menu. So this is another way to apply formatting. Notice we have font, size. These are your, actually I think this is how you can get your character and your paragraph panels in addition to the window menu. Though I always suggest you go to the window menu because I always get questions. I'm sorry to keep hesitating here. I'm trying to think of how I want to say this. Students will often close a panel accidentally, and I get question after question as I've lost my panel, how can I get it back? And if you're used to going to the window menu to get to any panel that's not showing, it's just nice to remember that. The only thing is remember that the character and the paragraph panels are under Type and Tables. You're going to have to go to a secondary menu, where on the Type menu, this resolution just kills me here, you can see that they're at the top level. We also have the tabs command here, which I tend to use quite a bit, and we are not going to use this right now. This is something we'll get into when we get into more text editing. But that's usually a panel that I do not dock. So that is very helpful having that on the type menu. Of course, we have the Find Font command on the type menu as well. I don't know if there's anything else I want to review. Of course, we have our Insert Special Characters. So we've got Special Characters, White Space, and Insert Break Character. These are all things that we've touched upon, but I'm just trying to pull this all into the topic of text frames so that everyone can see how each of these relates to the other. And of course, one of my favorite commands, which is Hide and Show Hidden Characters, is on the type menu as well. All right, I want to go back to the demo file just for a moment, and I've got a couple of text frames I want to show you. So this first one was a text frame that I created just out of an oval, and then I gave it a stroke of, let's just take a look at that actually. I gave it a 10-point stroke, and the type of stroke I gave it was a dashed line. And then I gave the gap color of white. By default, sometimes it's none. And the none, you can see, brings that fill color into it because the stroke is told that it's supposed to be centered on the edge of the object. So by giving the gap color, changing it to something else, let's say I change it to yellow, or let's do something a little bit more dramatic, maybe not very pretty, but you can see how we can get some really fun effects. All right, and I know we've talked about strokes and fills quite a bit, so I'm sure everybody is pretty much aware of that. The text inside of this, and I go ahead and show my hidden characters, you can see that I have a soft return after Monterey Bay, and then the end of the paragraph is right here. Why am I seeing this pound sign instead of a pilcrow? The end of every flow has an end of flow mark, and that's what this hash symbol or pound symbol is. If I had a second paragraph, it would have a pilcrow, and then the very last one in a flow will have this hash sign. But it acts exactly the way a paragraph symbol works. It designates the end of the paragraph, and it accepts paragraph styles and character styles. You don't ever have to worry about that. Moving down here, I think this is a better example to show you the text frame options other use, the one that I use most often. Again, this was just an oval. I put a triple stroke on it. Let me just click on it so that we can see the stroke panel. So in the stroke panel, you can see it again. It's a 10-point stroke, and the type of stroke was thick, thin, thick, I believe. And I have the gap color is white. So again, this is kind of fun too. You can play with different gap colors to get multiple lines. So for example, I'm seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 because the gap color is a color. It makes it look like I've placed these multiple strokes on top of each other, when in fact one is just a gap color, which I think is really helpful and lets you try lots of creative things without having to put extra strokes on top of something. You'll notice that the text inside of the circle is not getting right up against the edge of the frame. And I've said this a couple times already that my favorite command, text frame options, is the same command we just looked at a couple minutes ago to change the number of columns. But in this case, I'm changing the inset. And let me bring that back to 0 so that you guys can see what that's going to look like. In this case, it's going right up against the edge in some places. And then other places, I'm getting these really bad hyphenation problems here. So as I increase that inset, can you see the little blue line starting to appear? I'm going to keep increasing that. 9, 10. And we can see this is now the inner boundary. It's invisible when printed and it's invisible in preview mode, but this is what the text is using to determine how close it can get to the edge. Because it's an oval, I only get one inset. Again, I think this relates directly to what you guys just went over in TextWrap last week, which is if you have a rectangle, you will have the option of setting an inset, top, bottom, left, right. But if you have an object that is not a rectangle, pretty much anything but a rectangle, you're only going to be allowed one inset measurement. So let's take a look at this with a rectangle, just real quickly. In fact, this is a great one for us to use right here. I'm going to just change this golden bird to center text. All right. I can access the text frame options command two different ways, actually three different ways. If I'm in my type tool and I'm in here, actually, oh, sorry you guys, it doesn't matter what tool I'm in. I can go to the text frame options. So that's with my type tool. Here's with my selection tool. But I just prefer to use my right click button, and that will come up. If you've selected a text frame options will be on that pop-up menu. If you want to see the effect of what you're doing in this dialog, you're going to need to turn on preview. If it's not already on, by default these are turned off, but as you start to turn them on, your system will remember this. And you can see because it's a rectangle, I have top, bottom, left, right. They are currently linked together, which we have seen this so often in many other attributes that we can apply to any number of items within InDesign. So if I change the inset for one of the four areas, all of them will change to the same. I get to about 6 points, and I've decided that at this point I want a little bit more space at the top, so I'm going to unlink them by clicking on the link. I see my little bug legs here, and now I can increase the top more than the other three sides. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK and zoom in on this. Can everyone see we've got the inner blue line showing me my 6 points, left, right, bottom, and then I've got the top light blue line showing me my boundary area for the top. If I go into preview mode for this, I'm not going to see anything on the outside because I don't have a fill in this box and I don't have a stroke for this frame. So let me go back, click on this, and let's put a little stroke in here. I'm going to go to my swatches, bring my stroke icon forward, and let's choose, let's say, purple. And from my control panel, though I can control this from my stroke panel, I'm going to go up here instead to my control panel and increase the size of this. Maybe that's a little bit too much. And now when I go into document preview, you can see that I have a nice amount of white space around the edges. I really want to emphasize this because on some of the homework assignments, I'm noticing that text is going right up to the edge of either a filled frame or it's going right next to an image. Let me quickly just do this. Let's use this one here. All right. And I'm going to remove this stroke real quickly. All right, so this is what I'm seeing in some cases. If you are trying to convey some sort of special look and feel, that's fine. But the general rules of readability is that any text box has a certain amount of white space between columns, between objects and the text, and you're trying to form that consistency. I know I said in a previous webcast that you've got to look at that white space as a design element. So if the white space between multiple objects is inconsistent, there better be a really good reason why you did that. Otherwise, people's subconscious pick up that irregularity, and someone looks at one and it just goes, okay, wait, something doesn't feel right about this. They can't necessarily pinpoint it, but it definitely will have a repercussion on their evaluation of that particular piece. Okay, I think that is it for text frames. We will be moving on to graphic frames in the next webcast, and then some frame extras. So as I said, we're spending a good part of 2 weeks getting into a lot more detail with graphics frames and with text frames. Again, please send me your questions if anybody wants to review any of this. And please take advantage of the blog. I love it when you guys are posting questions on the blog so that other students can see it and it can answer, I'm sure, their concerns as well as yours. Okay, until next webcast, logging off.